Good afternoon. We are so glad that you are here to join us for the Garden Hour with MU Extension. We have quite a few topics to talk about today. But before we get started, let me just kind of go over a few things real quick. Oh, sorry. Okay, so I just wanted to go over our horticulture specialists that are scattered around the state. So you can kind of find your region and look at the color and match that over to the name that you see. I do see that we have one change. Debbie Kelly has moved to Boone County now. So that is a new change that has recently taken place. But otherwise, you can find the person in your area, but really we don't necessarily always recognize those borders. So if you, any of us will be glad to help with anything that you need to do. We also have some other options for viewing. We have a live stream on YouTube that you can join. You can also go to YouTube and go back and rewatch some of these recordings. And then we also have just some snippets that are available that are short and very topic specific. So just I wanted to make you aware that they were there for your review. And today, Zack was not able to join us live, but he did supply a video for us to give his weather report. So we are going to watch a video on our weather, and I will let that get started here.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's Garden Hour. You might be seeing some rain already this Wednesday, depending on where you're joining us from, especially if you're in southeast Missouri. And before we talk a little bit about today and tomorrow's rainfall and the forecast here, I do want to start this week by following up from last week and finishing our March 2024 summary. And so now we have our preliminary statewide climate data for the month of March here and can really take a look back and see how we looked compared to some of those historical perspectives here. And so March 2024 statewide average temperature was 50.1 degrees Fahrenheit. This was 6.5 degrees above our March average, so significantly above average there, and was warm enough for our 11th warmest March on record. And so if you look at the bar graphs here on the left, in the top left here, we show our Missouri 2024 statewide monthly temperature departures for 2024. And what we see is temperatures were slightly below average in January, but we saw temperatures around 12 degrees above average in February, making it our warmest February on record. And then temperatures again 6.5 degrees above average in March. And so we've put together two very warm months in a consecutive streak here with February and March. And in fact, this is our warmest February and March stretch since 2012. So there's been no other year with a warmer February and March than 2012 and 2024 to this point. So really some impressive temperatures so far in the calendar year. Precipitation was overall pretty close to normal. Our statewide average for the month of March was 2.83 inches, which is just 0.38 inches below our March average. But I will note that February was a very dry, of course, across the state, our ninth driest February on record. And we did follow that up with, even though slightly below average, still a below average precipitation month in March as well. So two consecutive warm and dry months here in February and March. And so now as we look at April, how are we doing so far in our month-to-date summary? Well, conditions right now for temperatures are pretty close to normal here. So if we look at our five major metros across the state, temperatures so far are anywhere from 0.5 degree to 2.5 degrees above normal for April. So while above average, definitely nothing record-breaking so far this month. And our precipitation, just like March, has really been pretty localized across the state. And so on the right here shows for the first 9 days of April, our accumulated precipitation percent of monthly normal here. And so where you see those greens and blues are areas that have received their average or above average precipitation to this day so far in the month here. But we also have a lot of these tans and yellows showing locations that are already behind on rainfall for April so far. And one place of note is in southeastern Missouri. Here we can see some of these colors are showing many counties receiving anywhere between 5 and 10% of their monthly rainfall so far, where they really haven't seen any of that rain so far in April. And so, for example, this includes Cape Girardeau, where temperatures have been about a degree above average, but we're already almost an inch below average for rainfall so far in April. Now, if we look at the last 7 days, it's easy to see where it's definitely been dry. So most of our rainfall has really only occurred on April 1st, and this was this large band of rainfall from southwest to northeast Missouri. Over the past 7 days, what this map shows here on the left, we've really seen almost no rainfall. There's been some isolated showers across the state, but no significant accumulations here. So here on this map, anywhere you see these blues, that's going to be less than a half inch of rainfall over the past week. Even locations like southeast Missouri and a few spots that got under some thunderstorms in south central Missouri still really only picked up anywhere between a half to an inch of rainfall in that case. And we also have several locations, especially in southern Missouri, where you see white on this map and that have received no rainfall over the past 7 days. And so I show this because combined with our very dry February and slightly drier than average March, as we've started April here, we definitely have some drought concerns across Missouri. And so here is the latest U.S. Drought Monitor map on the right for the state. This was released last Thursday on April 2nd here, and we can see really kind of 4 areas of moderate drought and some of this dryness across the state in northwest Missouri, northeast Missouri, just south of Kansas City and west central Missouri. And then our biggest concern right now, again, is in southeastern Missouri, where we even have some of that orange D2 or severe drought depicted by the drought monitor. Now, fortunately, looking at today's forecast and ahead as well, we definitely have some significant rainfall, especially for the southern half of Missouri over the next couple days that should really help with some of the recent dryness we've seen and drought conditions. And so on the left here, we can look at our current surface fronts across the United States, and we see really our main rainmaker for today is this area of low pressure just north of Dallas and Texas. And we see a front that's draped across Missouri with rainfall really across the southern half of the state here. And so are expecting this stationary front that's shown here to move pretty slowly across Missouri. So could see some of these slow moving, more widespread, higher precipitation totals in this case. And in fact, here on the right, we look at a product from the Weather Prediction Center that actually highlights a good part of the boot heel in southeastern Missouri over to Poplar Bluff and up to Cape Girardeau that's in a marginal to slight risk for flash flooding. So certainly could see some locations with the higher end precipitation totals, and thunderstorms could see some flash flooding in those locations. Now, fortunately, we do expect this rain to really start to move out of the area on Thursday. So Thursday will be a day where progressively drying out and clearing out across the state. So if we look at our surface map on the left, we see by Thursday morning that area of low pressure is now really in western Kentucky and continuing to move east and taking a lot of that rainfall with it. But not before dumping a pretty significant amount in a lot of locations. So on the right here is our 1 to 2 day precipitation totals forecast for Wednesday and Thursday of this week. And we can see it's a pretty tight gradient between the haves and have-nots with precipitation. If you're in northwest Missouri, we may remain totally dry. But then if we look in southeastern Missouri, where you see these blues and purples are locations that could pick up in excess of 1.5 to 2 inches of rainfall. And that's where we would be most concerned for that flooding as well. So definitely needed in these areas of southeastern Missouri, but we'll have to watch for maybe a little bit too much rainfall over the next few days. The good news is that behind this rainmaker, we expect things to clear out pretty quickly and set the stage for an absolutely gorgeous weekend. So here we look at our temperature forecast from the National Weather Service. Starting on Friday, upper 60s across all of Missouri. But as we get into Saturday and Sunday, We're looking at highs in the lower 80s across the state, which will be above average for April, but definitely feeling like some of that later spring-like weather. Additionally, we're expecting really pleasant weather during this time as well. So these maps from the Weather Service show our percentage of sky cover expected. Generally, less than 10% over Friday and even Saturday and Sunday, just a few clouds with 10 to 20% sky cover. So really a good weekend to get out and enjoy that warm and clear weather. Now we will have some rainfall returning next week. Here we have a forecast surface map for Tuesday morning of next week. Really shows the whole state could get in on some rainfall, but at this point, looking more towards northwest Missouri to see where those higher totals might set up. But we'll definitely have to keep an eye on this forecast as it gets a little bit closer to see what locations we could look at rainfall later on Monday and into Tuesday of next week. Now, moving ahead, looking into our third week of April from the Climate Prediction Center, here we have our forecast valid for April 17th through 23rd. And we see on the left here an increased probability for above average temperatures. So possibly continuing our slightly above average warmth here in April. And then our forecast here showing a slightly above normal probability for higher than average precipitation here. And so could continue this active pattern here with many of these April main rainmakers moving through the state. So overall, good news on this forecast. And even with warmer temperatures expected to continue, I've been getting the question, have we seen our last spring frost? And certainly doesn't look like after last week that we have any frost nights in the immediate forecast. But on the right here, we can look at our climatological average last spring frost. And once we get into that last week of April, this typically occurs on average for most of Missouri. But on the left, we show our absolute last date we've ever seen those last spring frosts, and we can see into late May and even early June for Marble Hill and southeastern Missouri. So even though there's no frost in the forecast, still something to keep an eye on into later April and even early May. But that's all I have for today, so thanks for your attention.
Okay, so looks like we're going to stay with that warming trend for a little while. Okay, we have our, if you tuned in last week, you may have heard Justin talk about the Mythbusters for lawn care. Well, he's going to add on to that a little bit today, looking at responsible fertilizer usage in the home landscape. So Justin, take it away.
All right, thanks, Gwen. I imagine a lot of folks are probably getting to the time of year where they're going to begin fertilizing their lawns and or gardens. And with MU Extension, we're always interested in promoting environmental stewardship, whether that's fertilizer use or pesticide use. So I wanted to take a couple minutes today to talk about some responsible practices. So there is this concern of environmental runoff, and sometimes it's called nutrient pollution. And we're specifically looking at nitrogen and phosphorus. And so these two nutrients, when applied as fertilizer, have the potential to run off of the application site from either rain or irrigation, and then end up in lakes, streams, and rivers. So when we have levels of nutrient pollution, this can lead to a process called eutrophication. And so eutrophication is when excess nitrogen and phosphorus lead to algal blooms. So algae will absorb and grow with excess nitrogen and phosphorus in water bodies. And what happens is you have this big bloom and then they die. And upon their decomposition, this is when dissolved oxygen levels drop very rapidly in these bodies of water. And this can lead to fish kills and death of other aquatic organisms. And even if it doesn't lead to death, it will produce a situation where it's not a prime environment for those aquatic organisms to thrive. So depending on where you're at in the state, I know in some of the urban areas, when I lived in St. Louis, there would be these sometimes sprayed onto a storm sewer, things like dump no waste drains to streams. So there's local impacts. So this could be maybe a pond in your subdivision. It could be a pond on your property. It could be a lake that maybe a stream behind your property runs off into. You know, everything has a drainage. So even if you don't see a pond or a lake or a stream close to your property, what you do on your property does run off somewhere. So the broader impacts would include the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. This kind of ebbs and flows with the seasons, but essentially there's an area in the Gulf of Mexico where the oxygen levels are so low that a lot of the aquatic organisms are impacted. And this is oftentimes in the media and elsewhere blamed solely on agriculture, but home landscapes can definitely be major contributors. When I worked in St. Louis and St. Charles County, one of our local USDA staff had done her master's thesis on sampling runoff from urban or suburban areas as opposed to agricultural areas, and she actually found much higher concentrations of nitrogen and phosphorus from suburban landscapes than she did from agricultural landscapes. And obviously there can be a lot of differences locally depending on what's going on a farm or in a lawn or in a neighborhood. So how do we combat this problem? So we can think about right rate, right source, right place, and right time. These are the 4 R's of fertilizer. So a foundation of this is getting a soil test and receiving recommendations. Those come from our laboratory. Those samples are analyzed so that we can understand what nutrients are already present in the soil, what nutrients can that soil provide, and what we might need to add to support optimal plant growth. So when you receive those recommendations, you want to measure your lawn and garden areas because those recommendations will come in pounds per 1,000 square feet. So you need to know how many square feet of area you are applying to. And you also want to only apply the amount of nutrients recommended. And this goes back to fertilizer selection. So oftentimes in garden sites that have been established for a while, nitrogen is the only thing that's required. And sometimes it might not be required because there's sufficient organic matter in the soil to cycle and release nitrogen for plants to grow. So as an example, if your lawn, for instance, only needs nitrogen, you would go with a nitrogen fertilizer such as urea, or sometimes they sell a green up lawn fertilizer that's like a 2903 that's primarily nitrogen. So you have the recommendations from the soil test report, you have the square footage of the site, and then selecting the proper fertilizer. In that case, if you just need nitrogen, you wouldn't want to apply a 12-12-12 or a 20-20-20 because you don't need that phosphorus or that potassium. Another way we can control this in terms of the source is fertilizing with controlled release or slow release fertilizers. So I mentioned urea. Urea is a cheap and readily available source of nitrogen, but it is quick release. So as soon as it comes into contact with water, it will be in a solution released into the soil. Urea can also have problems with off-gassing if it's not irrigated in. So I mentioned that green up lawn fertilizer. Oftentimes those are a combination of quick release and slow release. And this just means that it will be slowly released at a rate that the plants will be able to absorb. This could also be a product like Osmocote, for instance. You're going to want to blow fertilizer off of the hard surfaces and into lawns because it's a lot less likely to run off if it is in contact with the soil. Folks often ask, well, how can they calibrate their spreader? Sometimes there's recommendations on a fertilizer bag for a specific spreader. But if not, I always encourage folks to just set a really low gate setting, so a small exit on that spreader, and just make multiple passes. Otherwise, you can end up over fertilizing part of the yard and under fertilizing another. It's best to avoid fertilizer application directly before a heavy rain. And if you have the ability to irrigate, you can irrigate a 1/2 inch to move the fertilizer into the soil. The last part of this right time is to fertilize when lawns or plants are actively growing. So our recommendations for application of nitrogen on lawns is going to be April and September, because those are the times when fescue grass, which is our most common one, are growing most actively. So fertilizer application in the late fall, winter, or very early spring is not recommended. If you do want to take a soil sample, you can take 8 to 12 subsamples, 0 to 6 inches deep for gardens, 0 to 4 inches deep for lawns. And basically you just take a random grid of samples. You can do this with a little hand trowel, throw those 8 subsamples in a bucket and mix them all together. And then you can take that 2 cups of soil to either the extension center near you or send them to our lab in Columbia. And just make sure you label your samples. Most of the time we suggest to sample the lawn and garden separately because they've been fertilized differently over the years and might have different nutrient recommendations. We also have a lawn fertilizer calculator. If you don't know the square footage of your lawn, you can click on this hyperlink and it will bring up satellite imagery where you can zoom in on your property and you can actually draw a square around and it will give you the square footage. So for instance, this box here in black is 3,000 square feet. You can also use this fertilizer calculator. It's specifically designed for lawns, but if it says you need 1 pound of nitrogen per square feet and you have a 2803, this is like a green up lawn fertilizer, you'll need 11.3 pounds to cover your 3,000 square feet. Soil samples, like I said, can be dropped off at your local extension office, or you can send them directly to our lab. You can Google MU soil testing to get more information on that. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Justin. That was really informative. And you might check in the chat. Tamra has dropped some links for those calculators and some of the guides that will help you remember that. Also, as we're going through this, remember that if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat, or you can post them directly to the Ask Questions here and get some answers for that. So our next presenter is Tamra Reall, and she is going to talk about the cicadas and their emergence this spring. Should be coming up soon.
Thank you. So I gave this presentation earlier in the year. So there's actually a video, so I'll not cover everything exactly like I did before, but because the temperature that these typically come out is around 64.5 degrees, 8 inches down in the soil, and in late April or mid to late April, and we're there. So I'm expecting to start seeing or hearing from people in the range anytime now that cicadas are showing up. So lest you miss the last presentation, I'm going to share this because it is such a big deal. It's really exciting, at least for us bug nerds. But on the other hand, if you really are scared of periodical cicadas, or they really get under your nerves a bit, you also need to know about this. This will affect everybody within their range. All right, so this year there are 2 broods emerging, brood 13 and brood 19. This is significant because not only is it not every single year that we have the periodical cicadas emerge, because they only emerge every 17 or 13 years, but we have 2 broods that are emerging. And with that, also one is a 17-year cicada and one is a 13-year cicada. So we don't usually have those 2 kinds of cicadas emerging at the same time. So that does make it a pretty big deal. Now, if you're thinking, wait a second, I hear cicadas every single year, that's because you're probably hearing the annual cicada, which is this one right here. There's actually several species of the ones that we have here in Missouri. There's 3,000 species of annual cicadas worldwide. But what I'm talking about this year are these the periodical cicadas right here. Here in Missouri, much of Missouri, we have a 13-year cicada. Last time it emerged was in 2011. There are 7 different species of periodical cicadas because we have both 13 and 17-year cicadas emerging this year. We have all 7 species that are going to be found here in North America. So these do look different. They're black and orange red, or they could actually have yellow. That color is on the underside of them, on the abdomen. They usually have red eyes. Like I said, they're usually emerging starting in about late April. Here in Missouri, they'll be here probably late April, so any day now, or mid to late April, any day now, through probably the end of May. The other brood 13, that's up in Illinois, that one's going to be emerging probably in late May. So also what's interesting is periodical cicadas are only found in North America, east of basically Missouri. So it is just really unique to have these here. They do have synchronized singing, the males sing. That's not something that the annual cicadas have. You'll have individual singing there. But the periodical cicadas, they synchronize their singing. It can get very noisy. It does get very noisy, actually, up to 100 decibels when all of them are singing together. So you really can't avoid it. Listening to different comparisons of what exactly is 100 decibels. So your lawnmower, your leaf blower, those are going to be about the same, and they actually can attract the cicadas to you if you're using them. So just be aware, maybe put on a mask. But a jet engine is at about 120 to 140 decibels, so it's getting up there. If you are outside with a lot of cicadas, you will have to talk with an elevated voice. It's that loud. These are not locusts. You might hear people refer to them as locusts, but they're not. A locust is a type of short-horned grasshopper that has the ability to swarm. Very different than these cicadas. Cicadas are more closely related to aphids. So this is the map that we have for the periodical cicada emergence. You can see right here in Missouri that most of Missouri is covered. I've actually seen other maps that take it a little bit farther west. So I'm hoping so, because I'm in Kansas City and I'm hoping to see them, but I know a lot of people are happy to leave them a little bit further east. So anyway, cicadas are fun. They're going to cover a huge geographical region of the United States compared to the brood 13, which is a much smaller brood. There are a few areas where they can overlap. These ranges are based on previous emergence, but these can shift. So it is possible that they'll be a little bit farther south or a little bit further north, east and west. Why are there so many? Why is it so overwhelming? Well, that's a strategy that periodical cicadas use. They overwhelm the system. So that means that when they emerge in the billions, that you will end up, that all the birds will have all they can eat. All the squirrels, all the small mammals, your dogs and cats, they'll be able to all eat, and there's still going to be plenty left to lay their eggs. There's also some parasitic fungi that would probably like to be able to be specialists for these. Turns out there is a specialist fungi that we're finding does affect periodical cicadas, but for the most part, they're able to avoid specialist predators. So there will be a lot. Do prepare to hear them. You will see them if you're in their range. They can be a bit messy, but they're compostable. So you can just throw them in there, and the wildlife will also eat a lot of them. Keep in mind that they do not bite, they do not sting. So if they do land on you, just brush them off. If your pets eat them, they'll be fine. If they eat a lot of them, they could end up with a bit of a tummy ache. So just try to limit that. Your plants, for the most part, are going to be fine, like your garden plants. They don't usually go after garden plants. They might land on them if there's a ton of them in your area. But they're not, they're tree feeders. They feed on tree fluids. So if you have large, mature, healthy trees, they're going to be fine. At the end of the season, you might end up seeing some flagging, which is where some of the branches will break off a little bit. But your big mature trees will be fine. If you have young trees, like newly planted in the last 5 years, consider covering them with cheesecloth or netting with a hole of no more than like 1/4 of an inch to prevent those females from being able to get in there and lay eggs. So just a couple other things. Pesticides, especially in home gardens, not really effective, not necessary. Just cover them. That's going to be way more effective than even trying to put on a pesticide, because they're really not effective. And your trees are going to be fine. Your gardens are going to be fine. So really take this opportunity to interact with nature. It only lasts about 6 weeks. and then they'll be gone for another 13 years here in Missouri. So try to enjoy them as much as you can. There are some resources, and I will drop them in the chat in just a minute. Lots of, it's in the news all over the place. It's hard to miss. But we do also have some general resources. Like I said, I'll put those in the chat. There's some citizen science projects if you want to be a part. Cicada Safari and iNaturalist both have projects if you want to be a part of them, so that you can contribute to, maybe if they're in a county that they aren't on the maps, to help you be able to help scientists be able to find out where they are. And that's it for cicadas. I do just want to pop this up here. I do have an Extension Garden Steward class that's starting this Friday if you are interested. It's called my Green Thumb Boot Camp. Not just for you, but if you have a friend, a neighbor, anybody who is interested, in 5 weeks they can learn about gardening. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Tamra. I can't wait to hear the chorus. I just remember them as a small child and just being overwhelmed with the sound, and I'm just excited to go out and look for them and show my daughter about them too. So that's kind of cool. All right, next I'm going to talk to you about some landscaping things, looking at maybe considerations that you can make when planning for pollinators. We get a lot of questions about what plants or what do I need to do for pollinators. I want to help them out. So I thought I would just briefly talk about this here for a moment. All right. So some of the current trends that we see in landscaping are these ideas of green infrastructure. We're trying to support wildlife, we're trying to conserve natives, and we're also thinking about maybe converting some of our lawns into more diverse habitats. And you can kind of see an example from the Anita B. Gorman Conservation Discovery Center. This is in Kansas City, Missouri, where they're trying to use this green infrastructure instead of, having everything covered with concrete or with one type of plant. They're trying to diversify and just provide more habitat for animals. So when you're thinking about doing any kind of landscaping, you might want to think about the structural layer, your seasonal blooming plants, and then also your ground cover layer. Those are the three main layers that you need to consider when designing your garden. So the structural layer, we're basically talking about the trees and the shrubs that provide the forage and shelter for a lot of the pollinators. And I've received some calls from landowners that have seen like the leaves being eaten on the trees and things like that. But remember that is a food source for some of those little critters, and we need to provide that food for them. In your structural layer, some of the most beneficial trees for pollinators would be your oaks, black cherry, willow, birch, poplar. The pussy willow is an early blooming willow species, so it provides some plant nutrients and pollen for those early emerging pollinators. But basically, we just want to try to work with and around the trees and rocks and buildings and things that are already there and try to make it all blend in and work well together. For our blooming plants, the medium layer we'll call it, you want to try to plan for blooms that will start early in the spring and go all the way into late fall. Try to choose a variety of flower colors and shapes. And don't forget about adding grasses and sedges to your mix, because all of those plants provide different needs for the pollinators. And it just adds more biodiversity and interest to your garden. grownative.org, which is sponsored by Department of Conservation and also by the Missouri Prairie Foundation. That website has a lot of information on different kinds of plants for shade, for wet, for dry, and different colors of blooms that you can use. So it's a great resource to start with to help start planning your garden in your bloom season. This is an infographic from the Forest Service, and it just kind of shows when you're trying to plan the 4 different seasons. We have winter, spring, summer, and fall, and just trying to show that overlap of different species so that the pollinators will have a continuous food supply throughout the entire season. So the Forest Service and USDA, they will also have some resources for you. When we're talking about ground layer, you might want to think about converting to what we are calling green mulch. And this is from a community garden in Kansas City, where instead of just laying wood chips down around their canna plants, they've actually planted in some different flowers. And the asters that you see there, the daisy-like flowers, those are really important for pollinators. It provides a landing platform for them, as well as nectar and pollen. So that provides more habitat. And a lot of times if you were just to cover that with mulch, while that helps retain the soil moisture and help with some of the nutrients, it doesn't necessarily provide for those pollinators as a food source and shelter. You also might want to think about leaving some small patches of bare ground just for the ground nesting pollinators that we have in this area. All right, now when you're planning your landscape, that's what I want to talk just briefly about here. Some of the goals to strive for maybe 3 species of flowering plants blooming at the same time. Try to diversify your color, your scent, your shape, all of those things. But again, we're just trying to provide a buffet for the pollinators. It was recommended to try to group your plantings in about a 3-foot square, just so that the pollinators do not have to fly all over to collect enough pollen or nectar. It kind of helps conserve their energy, but again, that may depend upon your site. You may not have that much room to begin with, and I would say any support that you can give for the pollinators will be good. And then just remember to use some of the host plants, like we hear about the milkweeds for the monarch butterflies. And you might do a little bit of research for different hosts, for different insects and pollinators to see what ones might work for you. So when you're trying to transition to a pollinator landscape, start small, try to build on what's already there, and remember that it's okay to edit. You can take plants out, you can move them around, you can replace. It's totally fine to just try something out. I think that's what makes gardening fun, is being able to experiment a little bit with different plant groupings and just see what works in your area. Here are just some pictures. This is using that green infrastructure that I talked about at the very beginning. This is Little Blue Stem. This is at the Anita B. Gordon Discovery Center in Kansas City again. And what they have done is they have a lawn just that's on the other side of the picture here that you can't see, but they have a border of this little blue stem that kind of helps capture some of the runoff from the lawn fertilizers that they're using, so that we don't get the eutrophication that Justin was talking about earlier in that pond. So it's using a native plant and utilizing those grasses. This is a picture from Northwest Missouri State University up here in Maryville, Missouri. This is a fall garden, and you can see the New England asters, and there's a blue sage plant here, and it looks like there's something else that's going out of bloom here, but they're trying again to get those 3 different blooming plants at the same time to support the pollinators. And this would be an example of a little bit more formal setting where you have some woodies, you have some grasses, plus the blooming plants that help support your pollinators. This is a pollinator garden that's down at a community garden in Kansas City. And again, you can see the drifts of plantings that they have, again, including some of the trees and shrubs, along with the blooming plants. And then because it's so large, you really don't see that ground cover at this point. And again, Grow Native and MDC, they have garden plans that will help you serve as a springboard maybe for your garden planning, just to give you some suggestions on what to plant and where to plant it, things to group together. I think that's a really good resource for you to have. Just in general, then, things that you can do: try to reduce your lawn, try to favor native plants, try to add diversity and that integrated pest management, that IPM that Tamra was talking about earlier. Try to avoid the green deserts, like large expanses of just long grasses. Try to add more and more flowers to your landscape rather than just a few, and then try to resist just having all of the same plant. That's kind of the general message when you're trying to plan for pollinators here. And I believe that is all. So I thank you, and let me stop sharing and we'll get back to our next presenter. And our next presenter will be Ramon, and he is going to be talking about leaf scorching in roses.
Okay, can you all see that?
Yes, I can see it fine.
Right, it's gonna be a short thing. So we have some pictures that somebody sent. These pictures of roses leaves that are scorching, as you see in that picture. The marginal area is dead. I've seen these symptoms not only in roses, but also in grapevines and in oaks. However, grapevines and oak is a different cause, is a disease in that case. In roses, it has not been reported, this particular disease, so we're gonna leave the disease part out, and we're gonna see, look into what can cause these symptoms, scorching of the leaves in roses. So in general, the symptoms are brown, crispy edges and patches as the leaf tissue dies. Flowers may have burnt petals, edges and edges too. Flowers may not open. It mainly occur on sunny day in the sunny side of the plants, like a sunburn. And this is related to the amount of sunlight and water stress. And so here are some other pictures on the plant that it was taken for this situation. In general, this scorching is mainly water stress that could be caused by salt injury, and an excess of salt in the soil will produce a water stress situation, a heat shock, and drought. So those three main situations are more common in roses. And essentially, a water stress is when the foliar transpiration or the transpiration of the plant is greater than the water that the roots can uptake. And usually this happens in certain situations where the weather is too hot or warm or hot, and the soil is still too cold and the water uptake is not enough, or there's not enough water in the soil for the plant to uptake. And of course, this imbalance in the water transpiration by the plant. And this makes it's emphasized or is worse when a bright, warm, sunny day follow a period of cloudy weather, which promotes suckling growth, and then the suckling growth is not cannot handle the excess sunlight and the heat that comes after, and that's when those water imbalances occur, showing these type of symptoms in the foliage. However, there are other situations like a chemical burn or toxicity from certain elements that can produce similar symptoms. Yeah, chemical burn by pesticides and some type of herbicides too. And there is a study on fluoride that caused very similar symptoms too. Yeah. So essentially, to avoid these problems, so we have to manage a little bit the plants or the area where the plant was planted. And in general, well, one of the recommendations is because of the sunny, bright day, you don't want to remove that foliage right away where other part of the plants or other tissue are still susceptible to sunburn. So you want to remove those after new growth have come out that can shade that area that is susceptible. If it were a salt problem, you might want to do a soil analysis to see if there is excessive salt in the soil. And that would tell you if that's the cause, or you can rule that out. Appropriate fertilization application. The excessive salt sometimes happens because of excess fertilizer or concentrated fertilizers. If the recommendation for fertilizer, usually if you do a soil test, recommendation is by 1,000 square feet. If you want to concentrate that around, not 1,000 square feet, but let's say the rate for 10 square feet, and you concentrate it around the plant, which is it could be around 1 square foot, that is too much. It's better to spread the fertilizer around quite a bit in the appropriate area based on the recommendation. Irrigation, water regularly. Don't let the plant suffer, especially when it comes a bright, sunny or hot day. They need water. Yeah. One way to manage the situation immediately is to put some shade so the transpiration of the plant will be reduced. Move the plant to less stressing areas. If you saw the picture before, that plant, for example, is in the southwest area of the house. Usually the southwest is the hottest part of the house, especially after the morning, they don't get sun, and then they get a full sun in the afternoon when it's hot or warm. That enhances or promote this type of symptoms. Yeah. So look on the area that is not as stressful for the plant. Yeah, look for a good soil with good drainage. You can water periodically, but the drainage is important because if the soil is compacted or is heavy like clay soil, even though if they have water, the excess of water will suffocate the roots. The root needs to breathe to be able to grow. If they cannot breathe, it's excess of water that even if there is water, they cannot uptake it normally. So as a good soil drainage where the roots can breathe is a better soil, a better condition for the plant. And of course, do not plant any succulent or plant in the middle of the summer where it's too hot and the roots are not enough to, especially when it comes from a more a shady condition or a more growth prone conditions into the middle of the summer, into the full sunlight, that will stress the plant enormously. So avoid that situation. And that's all what I have for this subject. If you have any questions, please write it down in the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramon. There's a lot of stuff going on there, so a lot of things that can be causing the problem. So it's not always an easy diagnosis. All right, next we have Pung that's going to return to us with his segment of I See a Sick Plant. Let's see what Pung has to say for us today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peng Tian. I'm the director of MU Plant Diagnostic Clinic. And I believe I have already shared my screen, right?
Yes, we are seeing it.
Yeah, let's kick off our New Year's season of I See Sick Plants with some weird long questions. So as you can see from this photo, you can definitely see that some spots out there. They're kind of like not completely circle, but irregular shape. If you look at these spots, basically the inside of spot, all the leaves turn to be yellow and completely dead. And there are big spots, smaller spot, and this one could be also another spot. And something interesting you may notice that around the spot, the grass look greener, a little bit darker, and they look very healthy. So now it will be your turn to help me to diagnose the problem. What could be your guess? What could be the cause of this lawn problem? I give you 15 more seconds. If you haven't get an answer, just pick a C, right? because every time you pick C, it's correct answer, right? Oh, I guess we have two sawed webworm. Jared, I think there's something wrong with the poll. You may consider to resubmit it because I saw duplicate answers. I will. Can you see the 5 options?
Let's see, I see sodworm twice and I see chemical exposure twice.
Yeah, that should be fine. The first one is insect damage. Second one is a chemical exposure. The third one is fungus. The fourth one is physical injury. The last one is animal damage. I guess we just this is for the first time we have some technical issue. I just gonna review the answer in the next slides. Thank you so much for participating in this. Yeah, I will now share the result. So it is actually caused by an animal. This is a dog urine burn for the lawn. If you're a dog lover or you have a dog, this may not be that unfamiliar to you. So for dog pee, actually they can cause small dead patches, and the shape of the patch could be a circle or it could be irregular. But something interesting that the patch may be circled by a ring of a lush and dark green and healthy looking grass because the dog pea may have high concentration of nitrogen, but on the edge of the circle, as the concentration of nitrogen go down, it might actually serve as a fertilizer for some grass. And but in the center of the patches, due to the high concentration, the grass, the leaves are going to be burned. Sometimes it can cause the death of the grass. So how can we manage this the dog urine damage? First, you would need to be attentive to your dog and to dilute the urine immediately after they pee. And second, you may want to train your pet to more potty training, to behave outside. And sometimes you may want to consider using some commercial preventer, such as dog rocks and Patrol. I don't have personal experience of using them, but for some large-scale injuries, you may want to try those products. Eventually, if the damage is not that severe, the grass may grow back. And but if you want that solve the problem quickly, you may want to consider reseeding on your lawn. And as we kick off the new season of IC Sick Plants, I actually want to invite every one of you to submit a photos or interesting diagnosis to Plant Diagnostic Clinic, and maybe I will select your photos to present during our garden hour. If you're interested, you found something, some plant disease problem interesting, or you know the answer, please send the photos to our plant clinic email, and it would be fun to start our new season. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. That was great. I've had to deal with those little urine spots a lot in my gardens or in my yards over the years, so know what you're talking about. All right, next we have Tamra, who's going to speak to us again about pollinator-friendly lawns.
Yes, so pollinator-friendly lawns, especially in relation to NOMO May and NOMO April, because we are in April. And actually here in Missouri, if you wanted to be a part of NOMO May, you probably should actually do NOMO April, because that's when it's going to be the most beneficial to the insects. So this is just a little bit of information. We're almost at time, so I'm going to go a little bit quickly on this. But so let's see. So this would be one example of a pollinator-friendly lawn with a lot of diversity in the area that you might traditionally call a lawn. A weed is really a flower out of place. So if you are wanting these in your lawn, then they're flowers, not weeds. So I'm just going to call these lawn flowers for this presentation. Now, it's really important to understand why this is an initiative that's out there, No Mow April. It's really to support pollinators because these spring blooms are really important. Right now, there's less out there that is available for our pollinators to eat. And so leaving those flowers in the lawn is actually really helpful for them. Unmown urban yards can actually increase the presence of bees by about 5 times. So they really do contribute to a beneficial habitat. There are some considerations to think about though. So some cities are going to have regulations that say that you can't have things that are above a certain height. HOAs might have regulations about what can be growing in your lawn. So do take that into consideration. This is not just an excuse to just not mow your lawn. It does take effort if you want to have a decent looking lawn the rest of the year. Because if you don't, this is what you're going to end up with. Keep in mind that the typical things that we have growing in our grass are not native plants. And so if you let them just go crazy and, for a month and not do anything, then you could end up with a lot of other weeds. So that goes with the next point. Lawn flowers beget more of lawn flowers. If you have things like henbit in your yard, you will get more henbit. You will get more dandelions. You will get more nettle. So there's a lot of different things that you will end up with more of. So just make sure that this is what you want to do. And again, remember that the grasses that we have growing in our lawns are different than native prairies. So it isn't like having a micro prairie in your yard. You actually still have cultivars growing in your yard. So it does take more effort. Also, most mowers are not equipped to cut grass that is that tall if you go an entire month. So ideally, you're only going to mow or remove about 1/3 of the total leaf blade in a single mowing. So just remember that you might want to take that into consideration. So here's some ideas. For the regulations, work with your local officials to see if you can have maybe the regulations paused for a period of time so that we can actually have these flowers in our yard. For your yard, you might want to, instead of going an entire month without mowing, mow sections of your yard so that maybe half of your yard is in bloom at a time, and then you mow the other half. Also, you'll want to mow it or bring down the height slowly, so that might mean mowing twice. It also might, please make sure that you use the mulch setting, because you don't want to leave a lot of clippings on the ground that will actually be detrimental to your grass later in the season. So also, you don't have to worry about trees growing in a month when you start mowing again. They'll be taken care of with your mowing. And then if you really do want to have more of a prairie setting or more of a native grass setting, consider replacing your fescue with native grasses. Some other things that you don't just have to do this in April or May, you can actually carry this throughout the year. You can mow less often. You can actually plant other things into the grass like crocus or clovers. You can use a pollinator lawn mix. And again, you can just remove some more of your grass and put in more flowers. So that's it for today. And it looks like we're almost at time.
Yes, it's almost coming up perfectly here. But let me share my screen. Thank you, Tamra. That was great. Right, we have the right buttons here. So just a reminder again that we have the live stream and snippets on the YouTube channel. Just type in MUIPM in the search box and you should be able to access our recordings of all of those videos. And then also, so our next meeting will be next week, April 17th, I believe. Yes, sorry. And you can always submit your question to the Garden Hour at the web address that you see there on the slide, the ipmmissouri.edu to town halls. And just a reminder, here is a map of our different horticulture specialists that are scattered around the state. Feel free to reach out to any of us. Be happy to help you. And if you want to save the chat with all of those valuable links that Tamara's popped in there all day or all hour, you just go to the 3 little dots down there at the bottom and you can download those and save them on your computer. And with that, I have 1 o'clock. You all have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us today.